House Bill 1221, an act to authorize unilateral consent in certain divorce proceedings.
House Bill 1221, having had its second reading, is up for consideration and final passage. Are there any remarks?
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ring.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Professor Roger Barron from USD's Law School asked me to examine our divorce laws and how they relate to domestic abuse. This bill would bring us into line with 48 other states by removing the requirement that both parties agree. I'll summarize the evidence that I found with a few brief quotations from a paper published in one of the best economics journals published. I quote, "We find that states that passed unilateral divorce laws saw a large decline in both male and female-initiated domestic violence. That women murdered by intimate partners declined by 10% following the introduction of unilateral divorce." I continue to quote, "And that female suicide rates continue to fall in unilateral divorce states for more than a decade following the legal change."
Thank you, Representative. Representative Lattarell.
The bill that's before you today actually weakens marriage, and I believe creates situations where the abusers can get off scot-free. It doesn't actually help the domestic violence situation. So I would encourage.
Further comments, Representative Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to say that I've checked with our domestic abuse safe house in Mitchell, and I do serve on that board. And I've spent a lot of years working with the safe house and domestic abuse. They support this bill wholeheartedly. We know that women, typically it's the women who stay in relationships and oftentimes flee 7 times before they ever make the break because they're scared to death for their lives, for their families, for their children, and for being on their own because, quite frankly, their entire life has been controlled all the time, right down to the pennies. So it's a pretty frightening deal, and when they do make that split, it's difficult because the power over them has been phenomenal. So
thank you, Representative. Representative Hickey.
And we should, allow for as much as possible reconciliation and negotiation. And there's a lot of laws that protect in the case of domestic abuse, and making divorce easier won't stop this from happening.
Representative Langer.
They believe Tanya is not with us today because she did not have this available to her. She went before her judge before her attorney after she finally got up the courage to go file for divorce. And he told her, "You will need to testify in front of him. You will need to prove that you've been abused." He told her, looked her in the face and said, "No one will have you. I will never grant a divorce, and I will kill you before you can get a divorce." And that's exactly what he did. When they did the autopsy, she had skull fractures. She had been beaten multiple times. Her brother and his wife are a big reason why this legislation has been brought. We also heard testimony in committee that was very compelling. These women said they just want they want the ability to not have to go face their abuser. They want the ability to go and be granted something that they want to get out of.
Further remarks, Representative Rasmussen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I also claim this as a constituent bill. I know the young woman who spoke in committee, and she's a success story. She's one of the few that has been brave enough and was successful in escaping her brutality. And many of us don't understand what that is, but those of you who may, if you have worked in shelters or experienced it yourself, will know how difficult it is. I encourage a green vote to support.
Thank you, Representative Rasmussen. Representative Schoenbeck.
Thanks. There is no connection between what it says in the complaint when it's served on a crazy man, whether it uses a fault or a no-fault based cause of action. There's no connection between that and the guy, why he's crazy or what he's going to do if he's crazy. And the Mr. Aesop that's being referred to from that case, was nuts. I mean, you can read the Supreme Court decision about him. It isn't because she had to do a fault-based divorce.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1221. Representative DeSanto.
Divorce is here to stay. This is what I've come to. It has been shown that in states that have legalized no-fault divorce, that there is a decrease of 30% in domestic violence. This really comes down to the women. I want you to understand how this happens. These women are brainwashed into believing that they do not have a voice, and they are afraid. They want a divorce, but they're told, I will never let you have one. And as in the case they're referring to, they're told, if you attempt to divorce me, I will kill you. So these women become afraid, so they stay. They stay because they're afraid. They're afraid to face their accuser, in essence, in court. Yes, these men are not of right mind, but this really is about the mind of the woman, not the man. We all dislike divorce, but we cannot legislate morality. Divorce is here to stay. I urge a yes vote.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Craig.
Most people who pursue this no-fault divorce, they do so simply because they were bored. That's the facts. They were bored. It's not that there was abuse. There was boredom in their marriage. And so they threw out their spouse like a worn-out pair of Nikes. And they just don't want to put in the work that is required to keep the home fires burning. And they deceive themselves by thinking that the thrill of a new flame will last until death do us part. Well, no-fault divorce, it allows, I will say, for the aborting of a marriage that has been deemed inconvenient.
Thank you, Representative. Further remarks on House Bill 1221. Representative Stevens.
Now, earlier, we had some different statistics that was brought out to us, but, I remember what Mark Twain says. He says there are lies, there are damn lies, and then there's statistics. And so I guess I just have you keep that in mind.
Thank you, Representative Stevens. Any further remarks on House Bill 1221? Representative Soley.
About this. Ordinarily, I wouldn't speak in favor of anything that made any divorce easier as a Lutheran pastor. But having worked for years in the area of domestic violence, and my husband does that now, I think the most important thing for us to remember is that we're talking about lives, we're talking about danger, we're talking about a spouse who's been under the power and control of another. And even though we would wish for that opportunity that the good representative from Pennington and Meade talked about of personally helping, I've done that many times in the past, this is about providing a legal way so that that abused spouse does not have to seek the consent of their abuser. This is something intended to keep them as safe as possible in the most unsafe situation an abused person in a domestic violence situation can be, right when they are trying to leave.
Thank you, Representative Soley. Representative Hunt.
Are we opening up this big barn door to make it easy for anyone, for any reason, in essence, to obtain a divorce? And if we make it easy to obtain a divorce, we are weakening the foundation upon which this state was founded.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Haugard, we're going to limit debate here. Go ahead.
Thank you. And if we make it so simple to step out that there's no conversation, there's no interaction in ending that relationship, I think we do a great disservice to the parties that have come together initially to share this life together and to share these emotional, social, and parental relationships, that it becomes far too easy for that relationship to end.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Ring, closing comments.
These are not women who are bored and are looking for a divorce as an easy way out. These are women who have suffered serious abuse. If a domestic violence victim tries to get a divorce, she's in the hands of her abuser for the consent and is required to testify. That's the situation that we're trying to remedy here, ladies and gentlemen. What we have here is a choice between saving lives in some cases and saving marriages in a few other cases. And
Chief Clerk, do we have a vote?
Mr. Speaker, all members present have voted.
Clerk will please display the vote.
Mr. Speaker, there are 25 yeas, 44 nays, 1 excused.
House Bill 1221, having failed to receive a majority vote of the members elected, is hereby declared lost.